Alright, so welcome back to another share about the Dalet Elim Asiyah. Again, following this very nice English translation and doing it in the Hebrew as well. We are translating as we read, but English translation from Chasidic Heritage Series just to have a convenient one book source. But if you want, you can use Chasidic Dalet of the Frierdiker Rebbe's Igros. So, so thus far we've explained many concepts relating to the four worlds. The general overview in the first share. Then more specifically, we got into Atzilus, and now we're going to focus a little bit on the worlds of Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. Once you have the concept of Atzilus down pat, it's almost like other details start falling into place of how far down you go. That's essentially what we're going to say towards the end, but I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, I think we could just read a little bit of the Teichen, a little bit of the text inside, and then we could discuss a little bit some of the details, some of the arum, some of the finer points. So, thus far we've said, just to give a brief recap, about Atzilus. That Atzilus is a kind of duality in which it both exists and it doesn't exist. When you look at it from below, you look at Atzilus and you look up and you see Atzilus is like the first existence, but in a certain sense it doesn't exist because it's so much loftier than everything else. When you look at it from above, when you look at it from the perspective of Hashem and He's putting His essence into the world, it goes down in a chain of ascent. We compared it to lighting one candle from another candle, in that you take the flame, and the flame goes from one candle to the next. It's the same flame, it's the same essence of flame, it's just, now it's a flame on a different candle. So, Atzilus, when you look at it from where it's coming from, not just from a lower perspective, but from the perspective of what's above exists and it's getting passed down, Atzilus is still in existence. That being said, what we say is above doesn't properly exist because we can't appreciate it, and we said existence is something that exists only in terms of what we can appreciate. So, as that is the case, Atzilus is similar to everything that's above it, and Atzilus doesn't exist. Now that we're all properly confused about the nature of existence and non-existence, essentially, just the short of it is that Atzilus is an imprint of what's above, and it's able to impress itself into what's below. And now we need to discuss what's below, after that very confusing introduction. So, Omnam Elim HaBeriyah, the world of Beriyah. With the fact that it is the first is. I don't really know a good translation of yesh, but yesh just means that something that is. It exists, but existence we usually give as a translation in Metzius, so that word is taken. Yesh is just the concept of it is. I'm tempted to say it exists. It has a sense of self. It has a sense of it's an actual thing. So, Beriyah is the first actual thing. Atzilus, we said, is a divine expression. It kind of exists in that limbo between existence and non-existence. Beriyah is the first thing we can solidly point at. We can say, yeah, that exists. Really, the concept of the worlds of Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Asiyah, which first come up in the writings of the Ramban, saying, going back to the first year about where it was discussed in earlier sources, but the Ramban essentially says that Beriyah is the term that we use for creation something from nothing. Something would be a good word for yesh. So Beriyah is a yesh. Beriyah is a something. It's the first something that there is. Atzilus is not a something. Atzilus is, again, existing in that limbo state. Beriyah is the first something. So it's only a very refined element, which is fit, it's able to receive some kind of form down the line. But when Beriyah is created, kind of a tautology over there, that Beriyah is created, when we focus on creation doesn't mean that suddenly everything is fully fleshed out. Creation means now there's something we could work with. You could have a lump material, you could have clay that you can then mold. Something that you could mold is a material that you could work with. It's able to receive some kind of form down the line. So, even though it's only this very refined matter, but at the same time, now it exists. There is something there. I know, that is to say, it's not that the Chiddush of Beriyah is that it's no longer not in existence, which is what we said about Atzilus. That is the Chiddush of Atzilus. And it's also not an imprint. As we explained, the world of Atzilus is. Beriyah is already, this is in existence. It exists properly. But still, it's very refined. And these are going to be points that we're going to be discussing, so don't get too caught up on them for right now. But with the fact that it's very refined, it's still fit to be able to receive a form. This is why the world of Beriyah is called an engravement. Engravement is the opposite of an imprint. An imprint is, or an impression, is a very light thing. It's something that you could change, which is not so with a chakiko, with an engravement. So I'm gonna read through the next paragraph, which discusses chakiko, and then we're gonna discuss Mitzvah Hashem. I want to have all of the material out there before we start getting into the nitty gritty. So aval yesh ma'ila b'chakiko shu etzem hadavar ve'eni davar ha'nesev al ha'etzem. There's an advantage that exists by engraving, which is that engraving takes place in the essence of the thing. It is not something that is added onto the essence. And therefore, the revelation of what the essence reveals and so when you have letters that are engraved on, let's say, a fine stone, for example, which is an example the Frierdiker Rebbe gives, with the fact that they're letters, there's something that's engraved on the stone. But it's not that it's something added onto the existence of the stone. You've engraved on the stone. The stone itself is now saying the message. This is not so with letters which are written with ink on parchment. There, the revelation is through letters which conceal the essence. With engravement, the revelation takes place through the essence. So far that was a lot of words about engraving and imprint. Let's back up a second to discuss what we're saying. So Atzilus, we said, is an imprint. It's a reshima. It's an impression. You could have an impression in your mind. You could have an impression that you draw on paper. But the point of Atzilus is that we said that it's very flexible. It's an impression of the world, in a sense, as it exists in higher realms, as Hashem's impression of the world is, as you would say. That's what Atzilus is. In a certain manner of speaking, Atzilus is, when Hashem looks at the world, Atzilus is the lowest that Hashem can appreciate, kaviyachol. Really, Hashem is everywhere. But as far as it's like the medium, it's the in-between space. It's the place of limbo where that exists between non-existence and existence, whereby Hashem, in a sense, the non-existence, the point that we can't appreciate because he's so lofty. When he looks down, he sees the world, and the world is reaching up towards Atzilus. Atzilus is the outside of this world, as when you're looking from all the way up. And conversely, when we look at Hashem, very often the greatest thing that we can perceive, not just that we can appreciate, but the greatest that we can perceive is Atzilus. It says Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest of all of the Nevi'im, the greatest Navi that there ever will be, he appreciated godliness through the lens of Atzilus. In Tanya, it's explained that the Arizal spoke about levels which are much higher than Atzilus, but the Arizal didn't see those levels. The Arizal just was able to intellectually appreciate them. And very often we could intellectually appreciate something that we can't see. In general, infants, when you play peekaboo with them, that you cover your face with your hands, and then you say, where's, whoever's the person behind the hands, and then you uncover, and then you say, here I am. And the infant often can't perceive that there's a person behind the hands. They think that when there's a concealment over the person, that you're not able to, that the person doesn't exist, the person ceased to exist, and now the only existence is hands that are there covering. So then, when the person is revealed, the infant is quite surprised. Now, this is something that people don't cognitively develop until they're at least many months old. which is why the game works for infants. It's not really so entertaining for adults, because you do that and they understand that you're behind the hands. And in a certain sense, this is almost comparable to what's going on over here. Really, when we figure out that there's the person behind the hands and the person doesn't stop existing just because they're covered by the hand, it's not that we can see that person. It's that we understand that the person is there, the person is behind. And the thing is that the only thing we could see of that person is their hands that are covering them. So this kind of works as a way of explaining the way that Atzilus functions, that Hashem sees the world, and he understands and he appreciates it, and he created everything that's below. Of course he knows. Everything is surrounded by his mind completely, as is explained in the Mems in Tanya, if I remember correctly. But at the same time, this is the perception. The perception of the world is, from Hashem's point of view, Kaviyachol, it's Atzilus. And the same thing for us, that when we perceive godliness, we're perceiving in the same way. We're looking up at Atzilus, and we're able to perceive godliness in that way. Now, Halavai, I say we should be able, that we perceive, Halavai, we should be able to perceive godliness in Atzilus. That would be fantastic. Moshe Rabbeinu, the highest he was able to reach was a perception in Atzilus. But that is the highest perception that we can reach. Looking above that is looking above into the realm of non-existence, something that, as we mentioned before, we can't properly appreciate without being shelo, without the negative connotation. It's a non-existence. There's no concept of a non-existence to be expressed without the negative term of existence, without it being the inverse of existence, which is something we're familiar with. Atzilus is the highest of that. Atzilus, as we said, exists in that limbo state. So that's Atzilus. Atzilus is an impression. It's the thing that you see. Beriyah exists in a different way. Beriyah exists in a way of engravement. And in order to get into Beriyah existing in the way of engravement, I need to express first how Atzilus exists in a way of writing. Which is to say, let's say by Hashem. Hashem is, this complex, magnificent being, the only true existence. And in order for that to be expressed, if we would look at that, we would probably lose our minds, even a Moshe Rabbeinu-esque person. As Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu himself, that you can't see my face, because it's not possible for even the greatest of prophets to be able to look at Hashem in the essence, not just to appreciate the essence, but to look at his essence and not lose their marbles, as they say colloquially. So what Hashem did is he made an impression of an impression, an impression of an impression of an impression, infinite levels all the way down to Atzilus, until finally there's something manageable that we can appreciate in Atzilus. Now it's manageable. Atzilus is an expression of Hashem, and remember, it's the same flame that gets passed from candle to candle to candle to candle, but it's almost like Al-Derech taking the sun and shining it through a magnifying lens onto a wick, lighting the candle from that. You're able to look at that candle, you're not able to look at the sun. You're able to look at that candle. So it's an expression level to level to level, all the way down, until ultimately you reach something that we're able to appreciate as humans. So this is Atzilus. It's an expression. But that being said, Atzilus, on the one hand, it has this great advantage that it's very similar to what it is that you're looking at behind it. By the way, when we see a person, we look at their face, we also know and we appreciate that there's a personality behind that face. There's a brain behind that face. When we look at a person, we see their face, we associate it with so much more, but we've also learned to associate a face with what's behind the face. And if we would look at a brain, we probably wouldn't recognize a person, and also we'd probably be horrified. I feel like that's more of a coincidence than something that's directly correlated. But when we look at a person, we look at their face and we appreciate that that's what the person is, even though most of their personality is actually contained in the brain. So when we look at godliness, when we look at Atzilus is the expression of godliness that we're able to appreciate, we know there's so much more behind it, but at the same time, we're content and we say, okay, well, I understand that this is not really the whole of what it is. Really, this is a very contracted level of what Hashem is. But we understand that, we appreciate that, and we're okay with that. That's what Atzilus is for. Atzilus is supposed to be an imprint. It's supposed to be something that you could look at, that you can then appreciate what Hashem is, and nothing more. We're not trying to grasp the essence with Atzilus. We're trying to have something that we could look at, something we can fathom. Again, I'm talking in such an ideal situation which we're able to appreciate Atzilus, but this is the theoretical of what being a Navi is, of the highest potential of being a Navi. to be able to appreciate Hashem through Atzilus in this direct way. But even a Moshe Rabbeinu looking at Hashem will only see the back of Hashem's head. He'll only see the Kesher Tefillin. He'll only see a very external impression. That's what Atzilus is. Atzilus is an impression. And by way of example, the way that we can describe this is by saying writing on a piece of paper. Normally we say it's written on the paper. But really what it is when you have a letter that's printed onto a paper, it's that you're not looking at the paper when you're reading. You're actually looking at the concealment on the paper when you're reading. You're looking at the ink that's on the paper. The ink is covering over the essence of the paper. So, really, when you're reading off of a paper, you're actually not reading off of paper, you're reading off of the absence of the paper. You're reading off of the things that you can't see. The things that you can't see, combined obviously with the paper itself that's outside of the letters. But all of that together gives you an image that you're able to appreciate, which you wouldn't be able to have if you wouldn't have that concealment on the paper. So, Atzilus is very much a similar thing, in that Atzilus is an impression of godliness. It's an impression that if we would look directly at godliness, it would be like looking at the sun. It would be like looking at a brain. You can't appreciate what it is over there without the impression. But at the same time, the impression we know is really covering things over. When you look at a candle, you know you're not looking at the sun, and if you try to look at the sun, it would probably burn your eyes. That's something that happens by eclipses, unfortunately. People don't listen to health advice about looking at the sun, and they think that just because a little bit is concealed that they're able to look at it, but apparently it's not enough. They need to wait for the total eclipse. If a person tries looking at the sun, then they'll burn their eyes. It's not fathomable. It's fathomable, it's just very painful. It's not appreciable, whatever the word is. That is what Atzilus is in a certain sense. It's that you can only appreciate through the concealment, through the things that you can't see. You're able to look at the paper and you're able to read off the paper, but it's only with the aid of the fact that you can't see certain parts of the paper because they're covered over by ink. So that's Atzilus. Beriyah is a very interesting level. Beriyah is chakiko. It's engravement. It's like you take a stone. Sapphire would be the classical example because of the luchos. The Frierdiker Rebbe even used the word charos over here, which is the word that's typically associated with the luchos. So, it's engravement. You take a precious stone, sapphire, and then you engrave letters onto it. And what you've done over here is something very interesting, because in a certain sense, you haven't added anything, and in a way you've even subtracted from the stone, depending on how you did the engravement, if it was cracking or whatever, that's another concept. But the interesting thing is that now, it's the medium itself that's expressing itself. You're not looking at a lack. You're looking at just how the stone is formed. The stone could have cracks in it, the stone could have scrapes in it, but ultimately it's the same stone. The stone itself is expressing. That's what it is. So, this has, in a sense, a very great advantage over Atzilus. On the one hand, it's lower because it's not writing. It's not the ultimate expression of what it is. It's not this malleable thing that you're able to erase and add new details. Once it's written, it's set in stone, as it were. So the thing is that Beriyah also has this great advantage, which is that it's an expression of the essence. It's just there, and you're able to, when you read those words, you're reading the actual stone. You're reading what the stone is telling you. So, by means of example, by way of example, it's a very hard thing to say. I'll back up a second to just recalling when I first read this concept. It was in Zal, I think it was in maybe Shir Aleph or Shir Beis, and it was a mimer of Simchas Torah. I remember where I was sitting when I read this. The mimer of Simchas Torah, I think Tafshin Tes Zayin, and the mimer is incomplete because people didn't remember the whole mimer. It was said on Yom Tif, and whatever didn't allow my mom to be recorded when they were on Shabbos or Yom Tif. But the Rebbe was actually rehashing a different mimer, which I ended up learning later, from the Rebbe Rashab of Kinai Yisrael. And it reaches to a very deep level, which is kind of what the mimer is itself about. But in that mimer over there, the Rebbe Rashab and then the Rebbe, they start off by explaining how distant this world is from godliness. And all of the different levels of concealment after concealment after concealment, and then Beriyah compared to Atzilus is basically nothing. But then after all of those levels, like explaining how distant this world is from everything, the Rebbe Hasham and then the Rebbe say, okay, enough with the kunsin. I don't know a good translation for kunsin, but enough with the nitpicking, that we're nitpicking all of these details, that this world is theoretically really, really far away from godliness. Because then the Rebbe Hasham says, Atzilus is mlubash in Beriyah, that the essence of Hashem, and what Hashem is literally enclosed in the worlds of Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. Which is a mind-blowing concept. That Hashem is here. Hashem is invested in this world. So, the reason why I'm expressing this is because this is really a major advantage that Beriyah has over Atzilus. Even though Atzilus is higher and is closer and it's malleable, it's that which makes it a greater medium for expression. But Beriyah, what's so special about Beriyah and then the world which follow Beriyah, is that Beriyah is an expression of Hashem in a way of Chakika. That yes, even though in a certain sense it might cause a lack, Kavyachol, by Hashem, which you can't say, but by way of example, it causes a lack by Hashem. That yes, this world is a world of concealment. It's a world where we feel like our own existence, which is not so in Atzilus, where we can actually appreciate Hashem. Beriyah, we can't appreciate Hashem in the same straight-on looking way. In the same way that a Navi like Moshe Rabbeinu could look at Atzilus and appreciate Hashem. Beriyah is not a world where we can do that. But at the same time, we're able to grasp the essence of Hashem from Beriyah and onward. We're able to make it Dirba Tachtenim is more of an Asiyah concept. We can actually appreciate Hashem in such a different way from Atzilus. We can appreciate it in Beriyah. It's an expression of the stone itself. The existence of Beriyah itself is now a medium for Hashem. Not so with Atzilus. The whole point of Atzilus is that you go level after level, you're just adding on the concealments. Beriyah is, we're done with the concealments. Now, it's as concealed as it's going to get. Ultimately now, we can actually grasp godliness in Beriyah. Counterintuitively almost. But almost intuitively, because we live in a world and we know that we can actually appreciate godliness in this world. And we do live in these here lower realms. So, just to bring out a very fascinating point from a Sikh of the Rebbe, that, I'm sure it's expressed in more places, I just know from a Sikh of the Rebbe, that existence that we feel down here, that we feel like we are our own yesh, we are our own mitzius, we're something, we exist. Really, we can only get here because of how lofty our source is. Atzilus has a very lofty source, but it's, in a way, not as lofty as the worlds of Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. The classic example for why lower things have a higher source is given that it's like you have a wall of bricks, and then you topple the wall. The thing that was on the highest of the wall will topple the farthest. So, this lower world, in order for it to be an expression of divinity, in a certain sense, it's from a higher source. And to this end, says the Rebbe, this is why we're able to feel like an existence. The reason why we feel like an existence is because there's one true existence. And that one true existence is Hashem. Hashem expressed himself so thoroughly in these worlds that even though, from our point of view, we'll say that, the fact that we feel like something and that we feel like an existence, when really the only true existence is Hashem, in a certain sense, that's a disadvantage, in that we don't perceive reality truly for what it is. On the other hand, says the Rebbe, it's actually an advantage. Why? Because the way that we're able to feel that is because we feel our existence the same way that Hashem feels his existence. Hashem gave us the ability to feel our existence the same way that he feels his existence. It's analogous and it's congruent to the way that Hashem feels his existence. So, really, the fact that we feel our existence, even though it's really a misperception of reality, but at the same time, that misperception is rooted in the fact that Hashem is the true existence. And we're able to feel a semblance of that when we contemplate our own existence. So really, there's a very great advantage in the world of Beriyah and beyond. But the Raila, in the meantime, we also need to appreciate that Beriyah is also a lower world than Atzilus, and it's going down in an Shalshalos. That Atzilus is this more malleable, pure expression of godliness, and Beriyah is already, it's the existence, it's things that feel tangible, things that feel like its own existence, and that's what Beriyah is. There's another point I wanted to tie in, maybe I'll get to it later, but anyhow, in the meantime, let's go on with the Teichen. So, The example of this can be found in the existence of the world of Beriyah. That with the fact that it is the first existence, it's fit to receive form, as we expressed before. Nevertheless, it's not a full-fledged something and existence. Rather, what it is, it's only the first matter that its revelation is a revelation, an expression of the essence. That's a kind of the diuk I was making over here in these words. Even though it is no longer that whatever existence existed in Atzilus, it's not a properly revealed existence. It's fit, it's able to receive a form. To just explain this a little bit more, we say that Beriyah is unrefined matter, which that's something Mr. Shem in our second half of the share where we're holding time. We're holding definitely far enough time-wise, so maybe I'll try to quicken the pace. But Beriyah is a world where you have just unrefined matter. There's nothing to be seen because things are unformed. It's just matter. There's an existence. There's something that's here. There's something. But it's not caught up in a certain form. So there's no real expression in the world of Beriyah. Form is something which we're about to say. Is something that comes in Yetzirah. The word Yetzirah, which is form, Yetzirah, Tzura. That's it's a very related concepts, and that's what the world of Yetzirah is essentially. But not to get ahead of myself, but Beriyah is just matter that exists. There's no expression though, and in a certain sense, to go back to what we said in the first year, that really there's just two divisions of worlds. You have worlds that are revealed and worlds that are concealed. This is why perhaps Beriyah falls into the realm of the worlds which are concealed, because even though it exists and even though it's something, which is not properly the case by Atzilus, to a certain extent it's the case by Atzilus, but not properly. But Beriyah still is very different from Yetzirah in the sense that with Beriyah, there's absolutely nothing to see. There's nothing to look at because nothing has a form, nothing has a shape. So, seeing as there's nothing to see, that's essentially the nature of what concealment is, and that's why Beriyah belongs to the worlds of concealment. The Eilmes or Alma Discassia. But anyhow, moving on. The world of Yetzirah, it is called a quarry. Maybe you translate it as carving, but a place where you're able to take out chunks. It's that now you have things have a form that are not changeable. You go to the mine and you carve out a diamond, and now this is a diamond. It's no longer part of whatever mass diamond network, whatever mass of Earth there was over there before. Now it has its form. It's not that you have the unrefined mass that you're able to theoretically cut out a diamond as large as you want from this, infinite diamond mine. Whatever. I got lost in the example, but just bear with me. It's not like you're cutting off a chunk of wood. Maybe would be a better example that you cut off a piece of the wood. We're just used to carving wood more than having unlimited supplies of diamond. Although I guess wood is also limited. But the point is that you're able to cut off a chunk, and now it's there. You have something that has a limited shape. It's like you take clay and you mold it into something, you put it in the kiln, and now it has its form, and that's its form, and you can't really change that. So, it's not just that it's fit to receive a form in theory, like you would have with clay. And that the revelation, whatever it is that you're seeing, is only the essence of what the thing is. But rather that it already came it has a form of existence, that it has a form, look at it has a shape. That is to say that it comes now in a limited way. The last world, the world of Asiyah, as its name is, that is what it is. It's a full existence. It is not comparable to the world of Yetzirah. So the main thing is the form. Rather, the main thing is the existence. So this is where we're holding so far. So just to back up a second, we need to explain perhaps the concept of Chaymer and Tzura as it pertains to this discussion, and I think it'll give us some clarity in what the differences between the worlds are before we get to take it apart. Don't worry, we're going to get there, Mr. Hashem, before the end of the share, and I hope not more than 10 minutes. Chaymer and Tzura, very interesting concept. It means matter and form. You don't want to say Chaymer is clay. It's definitely a translation of clay. I think it's a useful example to use for the concept of matter, whether it's formed or unformed. And then obviously the Tzura is the form of the matter. So Chaymer and Tzura is a concept which seemingly comes from Aristotle. The Rambam placed a very great emphasis on it. He brought it into not just his philosophical works, but even his halachic works. It's in the Yad HaChazaka, in Hilchos Yetzirah, in those first chapters over there. Very fascinating. A lot of people had, in a sense, a problem with it, but ultimately, it's such a useful tool for explaining that it made its way into very mainstream Judaism, probably with a lot of influence from the Rambam, but now we're here, and we use them as a very good Chasidic, Kabbalistic mishalim. So, it's a good medium for appreciation of the concepts that we're talking about. So, something to appreciate is that we're seemingly referring to different levels over here. Because normally when you say Chaymer and Tzura, the way that it's framed is that Chaymer is the grub. Grub is a Yiddish word, and grub typically refers to it's coarse. This is just the essence of the matter. It's unrefined. It's just there. Very similar to how if you have, a house, and the house is made out of bricks. So you say that's a gorgeous Tzura of a house, right? It's something useful. You have a house, and the house is made out of bricks, and you're able to live in it, and it has the form of the house. The form of the house is what makes it chashiv. If you would have that same amount of clay just in a wet pile, that would be very not chashiv. It would be very not significant. It would just be a pile of clay. Clay is a very coarse and unrefined material. Now you're able to give it a form, and that form would give it something to reckon with. Now it has a value. But the clay itself is the unrefined, and the form is what makes it special and unique, and something that we would appreciate. So the thing is that over here, what's very interesting is that we actually put Chaymer on top of Tzura. We say that Beriyah is Chaymer dak. It's a very refined Chaymer. It's a very refined material, but at the same time, it's at the top. It's at Beriyah. Beriyah is higher than Yetzirah. Then we go on to Yetzirah, and we say Yetzirah is Tzura, and then we say that Asiyah is Mitzias. So something to bring out over here is that there's really, when we say Chaymer and Tzura are almost in a certain sense, they're arbitrary concepts. And I think this is a very good segue into what's going to come after this, Mr. Hashem. So, anyhow, it's a very interesting thing to think about. Where does the concept of Chaymer start? And where does Yetzirah start? Where does Yetzirah end? Or I say Yetzirah, where does Tzura start? Where does Tzura end? Where does the Chaymer start? Because I said you have, let's say, clay, mud, bricks, right? Why is clay not a Tzura? Because really you could go down deeper and you could look at the atoms, or really you could look at the specks of dust. Specks of dust suspended in water emulsion will give you clay. I don't know if dust is the right word, but something to that effect. So really, clay is, in and of itself, it has a Tzura. It's the Tzura of clay. Now, normally we don't look at clay and think, wow, that's a chashiv Tzura. Usually, for all of our intentions, we're not looking at that. We're looking at, is it in the form of a brick or is it in the form of just messy stuff? In a lab, they might be focusing on more of the Tzura of the clay. To them, it's very important, the network of the emulsion of whatever's going on over there. So maybe to them, it would be something that's a davar chashiv, something that's a Tzura that they reckon with, that this form of clay is very important. Definitely, you have in different material sciences, you have different materials, different ways that they're expressed, which different lattices. We could all be very important, all on a very small scale, where you look at this and to the casual observer, it doesn't look like it has any Tzura. It looks like it's an unformed mass. But then, when you look deeper, you can appreciate that actually it has a very significant form. And Adarabah, in a certain sense, we use the word Chaymer to refer to material, but as I mentioned before, Chaymer also refers to clay. Clay is unique, that you're able to actually fire it in a kiln, and you're able to make pottery out of it. This is not the case with every kind of dirt that's mixed with water. It's particularly clay, and depends on whatever the chemical composition of it is, and it also depends on if it has any other structures built into it. If you take clay and then you grind it up and then you try to make another pot out of it, it won't fire. It won't be able to hold its form in the kiln. So these are all significant factors that are not necessarily appreciated when you look at the essence of the thing. You just think, oh, well, this is matter, and then I could apply some kind of form to it, but the matter itself, matter is almost inherently, it's formed. Just to give a very basic example, let's say a single molecule. Single molecule has some kind of weight. The fact that it has a weight already means that it's being defined in terms of time and of distance and of mass, because that's what weight is. Weight is a function of those three things. Everything that exists has some kind of parameters that we give to it, some kind of tzura, not just that we give to it, that it contains within itself inherently. It's very hard for us to distinguish in our universe. We live in a global universe. We live in Asiyah Gashmi, no less. But the point that I'm trying to bring out is that when you say something, chaymer doesn't necessarily, usually when you say chaymer, it has some kind of tzura, and really depends on the context that you're talking about, that you're going to say, this is where the tzura ends, and this is where the chaymer begins. When you're talking about building houses, chaymer is, it's clay. And tzura is bricks, or perhaps the whole house itself. Some might even say that the bricks are the chaymer, and then you were able to use the bricks to build the house, depending on the context that you're talking about. As it said very often through Chassidus. It depends on what you're talking about. If you're a scientist and you're in a lab and you're trying to figure out the properties of a material, then the molecules, maybe the atoms, are going to be the chaymer, and then the tzura is going to be the lattice work in which it's expressed. But ultimately, over there's no real appreciation of chaymer and tzura. I mean, there is. It just depends on the context that you're talking about. That we're going to say at this point this has a chaymer, and then this has a tzura. What we're saying over here is that Beriyah is a chaymer dak. And not just that, it's material. Because material, almost in a certain sense, inherently contains some kind of form. Or not contains, but it's inherently contained in some kind of form. Beriyah is deeper than that. It's just the essence of the existence, without any of the details, without any of the parameters. It's the focus is only on the essence of the existence. That's what we mean when we say chaymer dak. And that's why it's taka higher than tzura. Because tzura, again, is an expression of the grob chaymer, the regular chaymer that we're talking about. Even the tzura, when you look at it in the grand scale, the house that's made out of bricks, that's made out of clay, that's made out of these molecules, but ultimately it's still there. It's still a piece of something. In the form itself is, in a sense, limiting it from just the purity of existence, the purity of it being something. Beriyah is higher than that. Yetzirah is a form, and the form is taka. When you look at a house, the form is the much more refined aspect of what this is, which essentially it's dirt. We say "Sheichni batei chaymer" to express how low we are, and I feel like I've used that expression many times throughout this series. People that live in mud houses. That's what our houses are. Our houses are really mud. We've given it truly a form, but the question is, do we appreciate the form? But lower than that, really, the house is essentially still mud, no matter what form we give it. So that's the world of Asiyah. Asiyah is Metzius. It's an existence. It's really an existence that has the matter and the form, etc. But ultimately, its existence. It's the ultimate of the grabkeit. It's not just the pure essence of existence. It's existence that's fully fleshed out with the form and with the matter in a way that we appreciate both to a very real degree. That's what Asiyah is. So let's go on a little bit and Mr. Hashem finish up. Just to kind of segue, what we're saying is Atzilus, Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. So we see that these four worlds, they go lower and lower. You see that from world to world, it goes lower and lower. It becomes greater and thicker. The essence, or not the essence, but what is the existence? In Atzilus, the whole existence is that it's no longer non-existence. It went from being non-existence to some kind of existence. That's what Atzilus is. But in Beriyah, it's only that there's something that's able to ultimately be formed down the line. But in Yetzirah, in Yetzirah, it's only that it's now existence is able to receive some kind of form. In Asiyah, practically, this is real existence. that it comes into actual practically existence. It has the chumrah and it has the tzura with all of the grubkeit. But in truth, after all of this, even the highest of all the worlds, of the four worlds, is Atzilus, is still a world. Which is to say that it is limited by the boundaries of what a world is, as we expressed in, I believe, the second share. In the same way, the lowest of the worlds, of these worlds, which is the world of Asiyah, it's also spiritual. It does not have the physicality of the lower world. This is something that we expressed in earlier shiurim that the Frierdiker Rebbe was alluding to behind the scenes. The Rebbe was trying to bring out in the footnotes. So this world of Asiyah that we appreciate, it's still a spiritual realm. It's not when we say that it goes from level to level, all the way down to Asiyah, it's not the physical, it's the spiritual aspect of Asiyah that we can appreciate that we have in existence. When I think about myself, I appreciate that I have a body, but my appreciation, the essence of appreciation, the fact that I'm able to appreciate the essence of existence in an appreciable way is a spiritual concept still. It's not the practical, physical, the lowly grub world in and of itself. It's the appreciation of the grub world. So, really, in a sense, we could stop here, but I think it's good to read just one more paragraph. I think it's a very beautiful point to be brought out of it by dividing it up in this way. So, according to this, the Gam Olam Ravi Hanikra Asiyah, that even the fourth world, which is called Asiyah, who Gamkin Ruchni, even that is spiritual. In what way is the spirituality of Asiyah different from the spirituality of the world of Yetzirah? The third world. What's the difference between Yetzirah and Beriyah? And even though, after the fact that Atzilus is also a world, how wondrous can it be? How removed can it be from the world of Beriyah? With the fact that they're all spiritual, with the fact that they're all a perception that exists above physicality, what makes them different from each other? So, it's a good question now. It's a question of, okay, now that we've explained that, really, let's just go to Beriyah, Yetzirah, and Asiyah, not to make Atzilus to make things more complicated than necessarily we have. I don't want to go too over time. But Beriyah is, we said, the pure, the pure refined matter, the pure existence, the essence of existence. Tzura is when we perceive that existence in a different form, right? That now existence has a form. And then Asiyah is the practical, not only does it have a form, but now it's grub, now it's coarse. Now you're able to have unrefined matter that we're able to look at it, and this is something that's pasha dirty, right? But practically speaking, we say that all of this is not the physical, the actual lowly, that it goes down here. If you would say that Beriyah is, let's say a half mixture of non-existence and existence, and then Yetzirah is 3/4, and Asiyah is 100%. Then you would say, okay, so each world you get thicker and thicker, it gets heavier and heavier. You go from, half a pound to 3/4 of a pound to a pound, and that's the shalshlus of the world is just going, you're gaining more weight as you go on. That would be, it wouldn't make sense because that's not reality, but that would be, convenient. We'd be able to say, okay, so that's the difference between the worlds. Practically speaking, something that weighs 1 pound in Asiyah is going to weigh half a pound in Beriyah. But that's not the case. The case is actually that this physical world is removed, untouchable by all of those. Our perception of the world, the greatest problem of metaphysics that's plagued philosophers and still plagues philosophers, is how we have that we exist as spiritual beings. Because I know that I'm more than just a meat suit. I'm a person in a meat suit. I'm some kind of perception, whatever I am. But I know that I'm greater than whatever this physicality is. So somehow my personality, my thoughts, whatever the essence of I am, I'm able to manipulate my body. I'm able to manipulate the world around me. But the world around me isn't me, and even my body, I perceive that I'm greater than that. I'm more than that. I'm something different than that. I'm a spiritual being. So somehow, not to get into how wondrous that is, but ultimately, I'm spiritual, and Beriyah is spiritual, and Atzilus is spiritual. So it's just a matter of perception. It's how deep I'm able to see into it. It's how deluded I am in my perception of spiritual worlds. Is that really the whole difference? we're saying that there are a bunch of different worlds. What makes them different if they're all spiritual perceptions? So, this is, I think, a good question. And I'm just going to give a little tangent story, and then Emir Hashem, I think we'll end this year. So, when I was in, I believe, my first year of Zal, so a lot of throwbacks, but we learned Shara Yichud Ba'amunah in depth. So one thing that I remember from there, it says in Beriyah that there are 4 types of students, and each one receives and appreciates different things, and it's what they take with them. This is at least one thing, maybe a story, but I was able to take with me and appreciate it. Kanai Nahara. So the end of the 3rd chapter of Shara Yichud Ba'amunah ends off with a question. The question is ultimately that Hashem is the creator of the entire world, and at the same time he's the concealment. I'm getting ahead of myself already and just explaining the question, but essentially it asks, how is it possible for the world to exist if Hashem is everything and Hashem permeates all worlds? How is it possible for the world to exist? And it ends off with a question. So the question on that question is, how can you end off a chapter with a question? We're not in the business of making cliffhangers, and it's something that you virtually never see throughout Chassidus, to end off a chapter with a question. Definitely didn't happen until that point in Tanya, really. So I don't remember what the source of this answer was, but I know for me the source of the answer was my class in Shir Aleph, that if a person ends off a shir with a question, they might go home and not have the tools or the means to arrive at the answer. And then they might, unfortunately, get caught up in the idea that maybe there is no answer to the question. And before they make it to the next shir, which has the answer, they might become dissuaded from Yiddishkeit, chas v'shalom. Again, Tanya's dealing with very deep things. It's really possible for a person to have a crisis of faith. If they have a question, they don't have an answer. But the question of, how is it possible for the world to exist vis-a-vis Hashem, that question, a person could go to sleep with that question. It's not such a bothersome thing if a person goes to sleep and imagine they become convinced, and they become really convinced that the only existence is Hashem and that our world can't possibly exist. That's a question they could go to sleep with. So I'll say the same thing, I think, with this question, that really I think it's a good conclusion, that it really drives home the point that we're trying to say so far, and even the point that we're going to be saying later to answer this question. Hashem. But what is the difference? When we exist in this world, we have our perception, and it's really lowly. But if we think and we try to really push things deeper, maybe we won't be a Navi like Moshe Rabbeinu, but we should at least be asking ourselves that we perceive the world on our level. And if Atzilus is also a spiritual world, and we perceive the world with a spiritual tinge, why is it that our world is actually so different from Atzilus? Why is it that we can't live and try to function in an Atzilustic way? That really we live in the world of Asiyah, but what's really the difference between Asiyah and Atzilus? Why can't we try to hold ourselves to a higher place? Why can't we try to live with a perception of divinity in a tangible way in our day-to-day lives? And I think that's just a beautiful question to end off with. That why can't it be different? Whatever the answer may be, that we talk a live in a global world, but at least it's an inspiring question to think of, that really we exist in this way. So anyhow, I think that's good to conclude. If there are any questions. Okay. Call it off.